Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our next installment of From Curiosity to Impact, a webinar series for AI builders. It's really great to have you here with us today as we dive into the second phase of our AI journey, the exploration phase. My name is Jackie Watts, and I'm the Learning and Insights Lead at the Patrick J. McGovern Foundation, a 21st century philanthropy dedicated to advancing AI and data science solutions to shape a more sustainable, equitable, and thriving future for all. In case you missed the first part of our series held back in September, I thought I'd share just a little bit about this webinar. Today's event is part of a four-part series where we'll be taking a look at each phase of the AI journey through the lens of some of our amazing grant partners. The AI journey starts with curiosity, in other words, building some initial understanding of what AI is and how it can be responsibly integrated into an organization's work. It then continues into the exploration phase, which is the focus of today's session. This phase is where organizations start to get a bit more tangible, actively exploring how to make promising ideas into reality. Some of the themes that we'll be touching upon today will include ensuring that potential solutions are grounded in real user need. In other words, taking a problem first and not a tech first approach. Navigating the build versus buy decision, how to ready an organization's data, and finally, how to go about project planning and securing funding for an AI innovation. After exploration, we have the adoption phase, where rubber really meets the road and organizations are beginning to build an AI model and often integrate it into a product. And finally, the impact phase, where organizations are evaluating what's working, what's not, to help evolve their solution and potentially think about opportunities for scale. So those latter two phases will be the focus of two upcoming installments of this webinar series. We hope that you will join us again in the future for those events. No matter where your organization might be on this journey, we invite you to lean on PJMF's Learning Hub, which is something that we've built as a centralized place for curated resources, learning opportunities, case studies, and much more to guide you and your organization on the particular steps of the journey. For today's session, we're really excited to be joined by three of our grant partner organizations who have navigated this exploration phase and beyond, and have generously offered their time to share learnings and takeaways from this process. We'll start with short presentations from each of our guest speakers, followed by a panel discussion. And we will leave time after the panel for some audience Q&A. So we invite you to add any questions that you might have for our guest speakers into the chat. Finally, after the webinar, we will have a Zoom link set up for anyone who wishes to join for some community discussion. We'll share that link again at the end of the event today, and we hope you're able to join us then as well. Lastly, if you'd like to share this event with colleagues and others in your network who maybe couldn't join today, we are recording this webinar and plan to post it on the Learning Hub exploration page after the event. All right, so let me pass it over to my colleague, Yolanda, to help introduce our guest speakers for today.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Jackie, for that introduction. As Jackie mentioned, my name is Yolanda, and I'm the Storytelling and Advocacy Lead here at the Patrick J. McGovern Foundation. I'm really thrilled to introduce to you today our three expert speakers. First, we have Nithya Ramanathan, who is the CEO and co-founder of Nexleaf Analytics, a nonprofit technology company dedicated to partnering with governments across Africa and Asia to ensure that they have the data they need to build lasting solutions that improve the health of people. Nexleaf's unique approach brings together sensor technology, data analysis, and user engagement to identify and address big problems. Nexleaf Tech helps governments protect vaccines for 1 in 10 babies born each year. Nithya and her team have achieved this outsized impact by working shoulder to shoulder with ministries of health to scale cutting-edge technologies refined through close collaboration with personnel at every level of the health system, from top-tier government officials to last-mile healthcare workers. Next, we have Jonathan Petz, who is the co-founder and CEO of Upsolve, a tech nonprofit helping low-income Americans achieve economic mobility through debt relief. Upsolve was inspired by Jonathan's pro bono bankruptcy work in Brooklyn, where he saw how many families were trapped in debt because they couldn't afford a lawyer. Since then, Upsolve has evolved from a brick and mortar legal aid operation into an AI-powered platform that helps people navigate complex financial systems across the US. Jonathan previously practiced debt law for over 10 years at 2 international firms and holds both his undergraduate and law degrees from the University of Pennsylvania. And finally, we have Sid Wiesner, who is the Chief Technology Officer of myAgro, where he specializes in making technology work in difficult environments. He's building systems that help 300,000 smallholder farmers across West Africa access financing and agricultural inputs through their mobile phones, growing the platform by 10 times since 2018. Before joining myAgro, he scaled agricultural platforms at 1 Acre Fund in its early days, built vision-guided robots for warehouses and manufacturing customers like Amazon, General Motors, and Boeing, and designed technology connecting seniors to healthcare and community services. He has a master's in computer science from Georgia Tech. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'll pass it off to Nithya for the first presentation on her work at Nexleaf Analytics.
Thanks, Yolanda, and I'm really glad to be here and with all of you. So PJMF asked us to talk a little about our journey and really focus on the problem that we're solving using AI. So to do that, I'll tell you a little about the problems that Nexleaf is solving. So this is a picture of a health worker giving a vaccine. And, a common misconception about healthcare across Africa and Asia is that the entire health system is basic, a little bit like the picture that you might see here. And when we see this health worker, we think that's the end of the story. But next slide. The reality is that in order to get to that final endpoint, medicines and vaccines actually have to travel a really long journey, and many of them have to be kept cold. And so this requires electricity, refrigerators, trucks, warehouses, and all of these have to work. A single fridge failure could wipe out vaccines for 1,000 kids in the matter of hours. And a busy nurse has to be actually looking directly at the fridge in order to know when a fridge fails. And so next slide. Sensors and more modern technology can help. So this is a picture of a sensor that we manufacture. It records temperature, it records the electricity. It knows immediately when there's a problem and can send out an SMS and also upload data to the internet. And so this device can help solve part of the problem of knowing when a fridge fails. But next slide. One of the really concrete problems that we started to see as these sensors scaled is that technicians who come to fix a fridge often never get trained, or they may have forgotten their training. They may have gotten the training years ago. It may not have been a great training. And so actually, people forget. And that's ultimately the problem that we are solving. And so next slide. We are developing out a large language model that is trained with equipment manuals, with standard operating procedures, with warranty documents, and with the sensor data, and then can answer information in real time about how to fix basic fridge issues, where the problem might be, how long it's been. So these large language models using retrieval augmented generation can provide pretty accurate information because they're drawing directly from the equipment manuals themselves. And then we connected up to WhatsApp because WhatsApp is what most of our customers and users access most readily. And so the connection of having a QR code, having a channel over WhatsApp has made access to this information extremely accessible. So next slide. So we've continued to scale our sensors. Our sensors are in now over 25,000 health facilities in over 30 countries and help countries protect about $1.5 billion worth of vaccines each year. And over the last year, we've actually grown quite a bit. And now the sensors do help protect the vaccines for 1 in 7 babies born each year. And now with this existing sensor deployment, we're now starting to roll out our AI-enabled solution, though we are still in the early phases of still testing and validation with users. But we've seen a lot of excitement, especially when it comes to accessing the content over WhatsApp. So we've got upcoming deployments in Uganda and Zimbabwe and plan to learn quite a bit more with governments. Back to you, Yolanda.
Thank you so much, Nithya. And it's great to see that you're already using channels that are deeply embedded within communities. The fact that it's accessible via WhatsApp is great to hear. I'll pass it over to Jonathan now for a discussion on his work at Upsolve.
Thanks, Yolanda. So bankruptcy is America's safety net of last resort. And the problem is that low-income Americans who need it have an impossible choice. They either have to fill out 100 pages of dense legal forms, or they have to pay a lawyer $2,000 to do it for them, which they can't afford. And so Upsolve is the nonprofit TurboTax for bankruptcy. Our software automates the forms that folks need to erase their debt and get a fresh start. It's built specifically for low-income Americans. So our average user has $22,000 in annual income and $40,000 in unsecured debt. And so far, we've helped 19,000 families get a fresh start, clearing $900 million in debt. Slide. And the problem is that we're growing at over 30% month over month this year. And every year we have 50,000 new users who are starting our tool and are eligible. And they have so many questions because bankruptcy is really scary. It can be tactical questions like, do I need to list my food stamps, my SNAP on my bankruptcy forms? And it can be like bigger sort of emotional issues, like if I file, will I ever be able to get a job or an apartment, or will I lose my car? And our app is supported by just 3 paralegals who are answering all of these questions and are reviewing forms the software generates before filing. And so it's super hard for a small team to keep up with the demand. And the delay in responding to users leads to massive drop-off. So 90% of the people last year who started our app weren't able to finish it and get a fresh start. Slide, please. So we decided to see if AI and an AI co-pilot could help more users complete the app and get their fresh start. And we wanted to know if we could add a chatbot to our app that would answer users' questions concisely and empathetically on demand, so that they didn't have to wait for support, and that we could just escalate the most complicated and hardest questions to support. And slide, please. And we actually, when we started this, we were really scared. Our users are, really low income, have a lot of them have different types of trauma in their lives. And we were worried that an AI chatbot would make us look cold and robotic and untrustworthy. And we also worried that our paralegal staff might be scared that we were trying to automate their jobs away. But we just started with a pilot. We rolled it out slowly in person at Blue Ridge Labs in Brooklyn with low-income Brooklyn residents, sitting down with them. And each week we learned a lot about what wasn't working from these user testing sessions. And we iterated on the tone and the UI bit by bit. And it's actually been a really big win for us this year. So the AI now answers half of all user questions, and we have doubled the number of folks that we're serving with a fresh start this year. Many users say that it's actually their favorite part of the app because it answers their questions instantly without judgment and gives them the confidence they need to keep going in the process. And our paralegals have also actually been really energized because they're having to spend a lot less time on the lower value questions and can conserve their energy for the more complicated cases where they can have the most impact. So that said, even with these big efficiency gains that we've had with AI, demand is still growing faster than our capacity, so much so that we're actually having to turn off the app this month to new signups for 2 weeks. But I think the early wins that we've had with AI have given us a lot of confidence that investing further into streamlining this process and making our support more human can actually ensure that our mission, that no one is too broke to get a fresh start. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. Great to hear all of the human-centered principles that sort of guide your design, the design of your tools. I heard a lot about empathy and co-building with users. So excited to dive a little bit more into that during the moderated discussion. I'll pass it over to Sid now for the final presentation on his work at myAgro.
Thanks, Yolanda. Hi, everyone. Happy to be here. So myAgro works with smallholder farmers who make up 80% of the world's poorest 2 billion people. Our mission is to help those farmers increase their yields and their income through a mobile layaway model with quality seeds, fertilizer, and agricultural training. We currently serve 300,000 farmers, primarily in West Africa, and the model works. Participating farmers are doubling their yields and growing their income by 50%. But the real challenge we're facing right now is we're at an inflection point. To scale to the next level of 1 million farmers or more, we need to fundamentally improve our cost structure. And for us, technology and AI aren't just nice to haves. We really have to scale impact sustainably while maintaining our quality. So today, I just wanted to talk through one aspect of how we're using AI exploration to prove we can transform our operations before we take some bigger bets on model changes. Next slide, please. So our fastest growing product category for farmers is poultry. We deliver chicks to farmers and they grow bigger and faster than other options. Every poultry cycle, our operations team has spent a month or more manually planning those delivery cycles. This includes choosing village clusters, delivery schedules, and logistics. And so we chose this as one of our first AI experiments because success is pretty obvious. If we can take that month of planning and it becomes weeks, hopefully days, or maybe hours, it worked. If the team uses it, it clearly can work. And critically, if the operations team really owns that pain, they could also own this solution. Let's go to the next slide. So our exploration focused on 4 critical areas. Data readiness. So instead of waiting for perfect data structure, we really started where we were. The team already was doing a lot of this planning in Google Sheets and could publish it as CSVs. So for us, the lesson was use what we've got and clean it as we're going. The second is around concrete metrics. It wasn't, let's improve planning, but really it was around reducing from that 1 month to under an hour. It was something we could definitely test immediately and see progress towards that. Third was our build approach. Here's where I thought it got most interesting. Sparrow was an operation team member who had a tiny bit of coding background, and he used Cursor AI to build this entire clustering platform in 2 to 3 weeks. This could have traditionally taken months if we'd relied on our engineers, or maybe even longer because we're waiting on engineering capacity. And so AI really here didn't help us just build faster. It made it possible, and it made it for the operations team to build their own solution. And then fourth, for us, designing and using responsible AI from day one was really important. So this platform is generating multiple clustering scenarios, different village groupings, different logistics assumptions, but really the operations team is in control. They're choosing which scenario makes sense. And so AI is suggesting, and the team with the operational knowledge is really making the decisions. Next slide. So the results really exceeded our expectations. Cycle planning that previously took a month or more, now takes 10 minutes or less. The team built it in 3 weeks or less. And as I mentioned already, really, this might have been a problem we wouldn't have solved because it was maybe too small to take on with the global engineering team. And the biggest surprise for me wasn't the speed that he was able to do this. It was really around the empowerment. This wasn't a top-down initiative. It came from an AI community of practice where team members are sharing AI experiments in the organization, and the operations staff became the builders. And the team really, because of their deep understanding of the problems, they were able to build it themselves, but also solve problems and iterate on the design. I do think we learned some of the hard challenges as well, and some of the limits of AI. Really needed a lot of guidance through this period. The coding wasn't perfect. There were a lot of cycles to improve it. And for us, it really was about improving the workflow there. It wasn't similar to what you heard already. It wasn't around replacing people. It was about giving support to solve people's problems. Next slide. And I think for us looking forward, this proved something bigger than just efficiency on one of the teams. There are many problems within the poultry supply chain and the supply chain in general that could be solved with a similar model. It's a small set of users, and we could apply this operational automation approach in the same way. The second, which we are running a lot of active experiments, are around farmer-facing AI. In these cases, two big areas are financial planning, thinking about personalized payment schedules for farmers to pay when they have the cash, and also WhatsApp chatbots for agricultural training at scale in localized languages. And then the third is really not just applying this more towards supply chain, but thinking of this same pattern and enabling other teams to use the same approach and become the builders and solve problems. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sid, for that presentation. Great to see how you're already considering how to scale impact sustainably and how AI can be a helpful tool in that process. And thank you to everyone else for your excellent presentations. You've given us some great threads to pull on during the discussion. So I'll pass it over to my colleague, Jackie, who will be moderating the panel today.
Great. Thank you so much, Yolanda. And thank you, all three of you, for sharing a little bit more about the AI work that you're shepherding at your organizations. The first question that I want to dive into, and you all kind of touched a little bit upon it, but I want to dive in a little deeper. One of the biggest pitfalls that we tend to see with the development of AI solutions is starting with a tech-first approach. In other words, if you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And so a lot of organizations come in with I want to implement AI and might spend a lot of time developing solutions that aren't actually rooted in real user need or aligned with their overall mission. And so I'd love to hear from each of you how you and your teams went about really gaining a deep understanding of the problem at hand before pursuing your respective AI solutions, and how you assessed whether or not AI might be the right tool for the job. And Nithya, I think I'll pass it over to you to start.
Sure. For us, because my co-founder Martin and I had both done our PhDs together in computer science a long time ago, about 20 years ago, I think for us, AI was always just a tool that we had learned about quite deeply. And so we took a really similar approach to, we just continue to use the same sort of product-centric approach. So we absolutely do start with users' needs. And actually, we've had quite a lot of encouragement over the last 10 years to be using AI. And there was never a real problem that AI could solve for us. So, for us, there was never a risk of taking the hammer and nail approach. And so we've been really cautious, I'd say, about deciding when there was going to be a need that AI could solve. And I'd say pretty skeptical. So in other words, the burden of proof was always in AI would be the last solution that we'd look at rather than the first. And so for us, the need arose about a year ago when it became really clear that one of the big problems that we needed to solve was this issue of training and memory. And actually, Sid talks about this as well as one of the use cases they're looking at around training for farmers. And so again, I think for us, it just became really clear that the only way to solve that kind of real-time aspect of training was going to be through large language models. One final thing I'll say before passing it on to my peer panelists is I think for us, the value of AI really comes down to two things. So do you need something in real time or not? Like, is there a very clear value in getting it in real time? And we emphasize that quite a bit because we build real-time sensors and we know the costs entailed with getting that real-time answer. So, with sensors, to make them real time, you need power, you need SIM cards, you need connectivity. So it's quite a bit of cost to get the real time answer. But when the value outweighs the costs, then we do it. Same thing with AI. So, does real time matter enough that the costs are worth it? And then the second is there so much information to synthesize that it just can't be done manually? And again, I think Sid's experiment of comparing the manual process of a month down to, minutes is really compelling as well. So those are the two things that we look at.
Awesome. Thanks, Nithya. Jonathan, how about you next?
Sure. I think we learned sort of what to do by our first AI fail. At the start of this year, so the way people come to our tool is from content. We have 2.5 million folks who are consuming our debt-related content, and some of them use the bankruptcy tool, but many of them don't. And so we said, wouldn't it be great if we could create like an AI navigator for people coming to our content to guide them to the best debt relief solution, whether it was bankruptcy or something else. And it was a good idea in theory, but it was actually, it didn't work at all in practice. And, we didn't have enough information about people to give them good advice. And a lot of people that were coming to our site for bankruptcy, it put a lot of friction between them and getting what they wanted. And it also confused Google a lot, and they downranked us while we had until we changed the focus of the site. So knowing like what didn't work, I think was a really good starting point. And then like Nithya, as you said, like we said, where do we have humans working in our funnel, doing stuff that is really important but unscalable? And can AI make their work more scalable? And that led us like pretty directly to this idea of an AI co-pilot that would answer users' questions as they're going through the app.
Awesome. Thanks, Jonathan. Sid, over to you.
I love those points. I'm writing down notes here. I think the real time and the important but not scalable those are fantastic lenses to think about. I think another one for us is, do we have usable data? I think there are a lot of problems we think we might want to solve, but we don't have usable data in enough of a format that we can actually feed it in or make it a part of a process that AI could really help. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it has to be usable. And I also, for us, a big part of this is, will users trust it? And so you saw the problem I pointed out was something that was very internal. And so it's a very limited set of users. It's really easy to build trust with 1 or 10 or 20 people, and they're all internal. But when you talk about end users, in our case, farmers, trust is something that is often not present with technology. It is something that is present in relationships with people in their village. And so this isn't something we can just assume we have because we built something interesting and even useful. We have to think about trust as a foundational part of that. And so there are problems that is much harder to do that with, and problems that are much easier. And it's really important that we think about that with the design, and we make sure our answers are really highly valuable, are accurate, and in some cases, we're not sure if our threshold is there yet and it meets that, so that farmers will retain trust. And so we've we've slowed certain areas of investment, or we have done smaller experiments and not pushed those yet to pilot or scale until we can get over that threshold for ourselves.
Jackie, do you mind if I jump in on that?
Sure.
I think that is such an important point. And, with any tech, trust is really important. But I think especially, Sid is pointing out, we found the exact same thing with our users as well. And I've actually, for the first time in my life, actually been encouraging our team to slow down. Because I think especially with AI, there's sort of this nonlinear effect that happens where when people start to lose trust, it can happen really quickly. And so I can't emphasize enough how important it is to be looking at trust. And one question I have, I don't have an answer. So curious if the panelists do, is like, how do we start to measure trust through the responses? Like, can we measure skepticism? Can we measure, some of those things? So literally, this is a very live conversation this week. So I had to jump in. Thanks, Sid.
Awesome. Well, I think that that theme of trust and how trust plays such a critical role might come into play in my next question for Jonathan. Jonathan, I'd love to hear a little bit more about what you considered a failure of one of your earlier prototypes. And if you wouldn't mind sharing, especially like what learnings came out of that experience that you drew into kind of future endeavors in terms of the planning of your product development, defining metrics, identifying and mitigating risks, things like that.
Yeah, I think, Nithya, that's a really just an epically huge question of like, how do you measure trust? Like for me, it's like we get a lot of Google reviews when things go well or poorly. And so so that's like one way, but it's just really, that's like the edge cases and being able to measure in a more concrete way, I think would be super valuable. I think in terms of our AI failure, it came really from like solution first, and not really talking. It's easy for us to talk to people who use our bankruptcy tool because they know who we are and they're going through this multi-hour process. But it's hard for us to talk to people that are coming to our site to consume our content. And so we made some assumptions about what those folks wanted based on like market trends. Bankruptcy is a small market, debt consolidation and debt management plans and debt settlement are bigger markets. And so wouldn't it be cool if we could help people, guide people through all these bigger markets because they trust us? But I think we didn't understand that people who are coming to our site and just reading our content don't necessarily trust us the same way that folks who are using our tool do. And that wasn't what they wanted from us. They just wanted to read something answering their one question. They didn't want us to be their advisor on Google.
Awesome. Thanks, Jonathan. For Sid, I have a question for you. Whether an organization is kind of new to tech and AI or has a history of being tech forward, it's always a pretty big decision around that build versus buy. In other words, is there off-the-shelf solutions that can help do the job, or should an organization invest in building up internal tech capacity or outsourcing technology development? So I'm curious how myAgro kind of navigated that decision and when you've made trade-offs. So if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit more about how you made those trade-offs and why.
Sure. I will just have to share my own personal bias to start. I come from a computer science background. I love building stuff. I love building custom systems. And so there is that. But I will be honest, at most organizations, my default setting is to buy whenever you can. I don't think it makes sense in a lot of cases to build it. I think I will pick examples. I don't think it ever really makes sense at organizations I've ever been a part of to build a custom finance system. It's a fantastic area to buy. And there are many examples of that where phenomenal systems are in place. They exist out there. They're commercially available. It is so much cheaper to buy it and do some configuration work than anything else. But I do think the areas where that is changing are maybe two parts. The first is for myAgro, it has been a real struggle to find user interfaces that really work for farmers. And when you talk about like the end user experience, we talked about trust a little. I don't have a solution for that, but trust is built by using something and seeing that it's repeatable, that it speaks in a language you understand, both the visual language, the actual words that are appearing. And so I really do think investing in user experiences where nothing else exists or the tools are really poor is worth it. Most of my experience has been that when I think back on it. I previously in another life did robotics, and the hardest part of that was building a user experience that took a really complicated thing and made it accessible when it got confused, how to reorient, how to introduce it back into your workflow. And so much of what we're doing at myAgro is working with lower literacy folks working in really rural villages, often online, offline, and so poor connectivity or intermittent connectivity. There are a lot of things we're trying to do that I would say were fairly complex workflows behind the scenes, and we're really trying to simplify those and say, this is the most important pieces of information you need to see. Here's the key information you need to make decisions on. And so driving that and investing in those user interfaces, I think is worth it and worth it for a lot of organizations. I do think also the example I used was on purpose because I think the cost of doing that is starting to change, and AI tools are incredible for doing really quick prototypes, for doing these kind of one-off tools with a limited set of audiences, which may not make sense to ever find one out there. Commercially, it isn't available. It's too custom of a problem. And so you can really build these specialized tools. And then the last one I would say is, I think integrations also are a really important part of it. So you have these systems you buy, but connecting those into a cohesive whole to really make the organization work well is something that AI is really well suited to. There's great documentation out there, and fairly non-technical folks on your team can start connecting the dots on those. And so we're excited to invest in those. And that's, my equation hasn't completely changed. I'm still on the default setting of buy it if you can, but I think that the build threshold and the pain tolerance there, my levels are starting to lower, and I'm looking for opportunities to maybe do AI assisted custom builds now.
Awesome. And it sounds like from your presentation that the tools that like Cursor that you use during prototyping is something that you're continuing to build upon as you're thinking about scale, rather than using it just as a prototyping tool and then
exactly.
Is that right? Yeah.
Exactly.
Fantastic. Nithya, next question I have for you. During the exploration stage, especially, it's so important to be bringing key stakeholders into the conversation to provide insights and pave the way for solution development. Not just those who might be actually building the solution, but community members, potential funders, those who are part of the regulatory ecosystem, and so forth and so on. For you and Nexleaf, I'd love to hear more about kind of who are the stakeholders that your team thought about during this phase, and how did you go about communicating and engaging with those stakeholders to help make your solution into a reality?
Yeah, so one of the things that I think Nexleaf might be a little more unique in this crowd is that because we work with health systems, we tend to work at the national government level and implement solutions that kind of roll out countrywide overnight. And so it does require both really intensive engagement with users on the ground, nurses who run facilities, district supervisors, national supervisors, but also requires engagement at the global level because there's a lot of regulation over what we do. And so at the kind of global level. So we do engage quite a bit with the World Health Organization, with UNICEF, and with Gavi, because each of them play a different role in the sort of global certifications. But I'll give you one really concrete example. Actually, I'll give you two concrete examples. So one is we work closely with Gavi. Gavi's the $8 billion vaccine institution that helps the 80 poorest countries buy vaccines. And so we've been working with Gavi because there's so many operational use cases, like the use cases you've heard today, but specifically in the vaccine supply chain. And so what we've been, I think, really effective at is both operating as a vendor that sells stuff to countries, but also helping to shape the markets. And so we've been taking a market shaping approach for AI, because the reality is that Gavi has a lot of money, even in this environment, but really struggles to figure out how and where to most effectively spend that money. So we've been an evidence thought partner essentially with Gavi, where we are going to be helping to evaluate what is the real ROI in investing in AI for training. Because the reality is that after buying vaccines, training tends to be one of the biggest spends for a lot of these global health institutions. Trainings are kind of easy to buy. People know kind of generally what they look like. And so now with budgets shrinking, being able to leverage AI to dramatically reduce the cost of training is becoming really attractive. But because Gavi operates at the global level, they can't just decide to do that. They need to have evidence and be able to point to successes. So we've been working really closely with Gavi from their CEO across their leadership team to think about and craft a strategy for collecting evidence on AI in the vaccine supply chain. Do you want me to mention the second one, or should I keep it there? I can also hold on to it.
Sure. No, mention the second one.
So the second one is related to kind of eating your own dog food. So we've actually been using we've been using our AI-enabled co-pilot solution internally to support training internally. So basically, the advantage is that Nexleaf is not only building out these AI solutions to support governments in managing their medical devices, but we also have to manage these medical devices ourselves because we manufacture them. So we've been rolling out our AI-enabled tool actually to our contractors, who then put the devices out there. And actually, we've gotten the best quality feedback from them because they're paid, they're on the hook. They don't care whether they use our AI solution or something else. They just need to be successful. There's no sort of pride or anything there for them. So we've been getting really high quality feedback. And when they don't like it, they tell us. So that's been really effective. And so we've been starting to expand that strategy and work with other manufacturers who similarly, they have no attachment, AI or not, they just need to get a job done. And so we're getting really good feedback from those stakeholders.
Yeah, that dog fooding approach has been really good for us too. So we also have internal AI for our paralegals and responding to these questions, and that we get feedback much faster that way when a paralegal doesn't like the way the AI is responding.
Awesome. Those are great examples, and agree that power of dog fooding and getting feedback really quickly from internal folks. My next question is for all three of you. As you've likely experienced in your organization's work, success of an AI solution is often contingent on having the right data, having good data. A step that's much easier said than done. So this often can require unifying disparate data sources, cleaning and making data more usable, having the right infrastructure in place, et cetera. And all while pursuing responsible AI practices like strong data privacy and data sovereignty, the right of individuals or communities to have control over their data. So what were some of the toughest challenges that your organization had to tackle when it came to your data? And what tips might you give to organizations who are just getting started on improving their own data readiness? Maybe Sid, if I could pass that over to you first.
That's such a big question. I feel like I'm going to scratch the surface, but there's a lot there. I do think this is one of the areas that we didn't build a lot of our data infrastructure for AI use. We built it for ourselves, and that was really powerful for us. We've, the last 5 years especially, we invested in, a centralized data warehouse. We really have built out a very small, but a data team that has been doing a lot of analysis and building dashboards for the team. And a lot of these new applications really get to use that as the foundation. And so that's a huge benefit for us, is looking and saying, hey, this is something we already had. It's already something we're using for our program every day. But there are aspects of this that will be very useful. But that said, there's so many data challenges that I think about. Anywhere you have a place that people are doing manual data work, inconsistent. We have village names spelled 3 different ways. We've got the same farm. Sometimes there's someone's using an interface and they get confused, so they enroll the same farmer 5 times. And so you have to have ways that allow the team to go back and flag those data sources. I think for us, a big part of this was making more of this data visible to the team itself. And so this is kind of that idea from Nithya's presentation where she talked about real-time access to this. It's a similar idea. For me, it was a feedback loop. I want to reflect the data that people do data entry on as quickly as I can back to them, so that they see it's their data, they created it, they have a lot of ownership. When I started at myAgro, it was a printed report that would show up sometimes a month or 2 later, and people would look at it and go, this is wrong. Someone at the office screwed this up. And it wasn't true, but it was just too long. The feedback loop was too long. And so a lot of the solutions I have around some of the data challenges end up being that, which is, how do you reflect it as quickly back? How do you give feedback as quickly as possible back to the team? Maybe I'll pass the baton to Jonathan.
Yeah, I think that so dashboards are really critical. I think we didn't have a really strong data muscle at Upsolve until we started this AI journey. And like the simplest thing was just like, we have a dashboard of like how fast people are finishing our tool that are not using AI, and how fast are people finishing it who are. It turns out it was 5 times faster, the AI users. And so just indexing on that. And then we also have quality metrics, and basically the results of each user were the same. I think that one simple dashboard was a big win for us, just in terms of focusing us on like the differential impact.
So we had a slightly different experience, only because our entire intervention has been data. So, we've been putting these sensors out in the world that collect data. So we actually, had the benefit of building out data infrastructure over the last 15 years. And so we have a slightly different experience, which is, I found that my team ended up, and I don't know if this is helpful or not, because data quality is so important. I found that our team was focusing too much on data quality. And so I know you never hear anybody say that, but I think part of it is just our backgrounds, because of where we had come from. And we had spent so much time sort of obsessing over data quality. And so we actually had to take a slightly different approach and just say, we're just going to, like, this data is never going to be perfect. The issues Sid brought up of 3 different village names, et cetera, like, that's just always going to be there. And so really learning to kind of tolerate it, build in some resilience, build in the ability to recognize it in real time. All of that's super crucial to do, and also being willing to just kind of move forward. But since we've talked about data quality, I'll just mention the data sovereignty part, which is actually something that's very close to my heart personally, but also to the work, which is that data ownership, data, as we all have heard, data is the new oil, data is, hugely valuable, et cetera. And so thinking about ownership is so important. And there's been a lot of academic writing about it, but honestly, not a lot in practice. And so when we were working in global health, even 10 years ago, I was shocked to see that there was nothing implemented in practice around ownership of data. So we had these great digital health principles and practices that everybody would cite. nothing about ownership of data. So one of the sort of personal things that we've taken it upon ourselves, even before the current LLM craze, has been to really implement data ownership. And so we started by implementing very clear data sovereignty policies, specifically that countries own this data. It is their data. We weren't going to, advertise it, et cetera. We weren't going to publish on it, all of those things, right? So we really fleshed that out in a lot of detail. And then we started to work globally with Gavi and UNICEF and the World Health Organization to actually put this into practice. And so we actually helped the World Health Organization write, from what we know, the very first sort of data sovereignty policy into their practices when it came to digital systems. So data sovereignty is one of those things that always gets tacked on at the end. We think about ownership last because I think in our sector, ownership is sort of a tricky word. But I can't emphasize enough how important it is to think about and clarify with the communities we serve, like who owns this data finally, and what does that really mean? And then to put it into practice. It's all well and good to say like, okay, you own the data, but to really then build what one of our ministry partners calls real data ownership. He was like, great, I'm glad you got this on paper, but now I want real data ownership. I think that's right.
Yeah, going beyond just talking about it and thinking about how it's really implemented at the core and not tacked on as an afterthought. Really important. I'm going to move into a couple of audience questions next, and one kind of dovetails nicely on this discussion, which came in from Leila. I'd love to hear the panel's thoughts on AI holding confidential or sensitive information, such as people's finances. Jonathan, that might be directed at
you. So my CTO would really have a really articulate answer for this. It's really important, building trust is so hard, and the second we have one data breach, we can just lose everything, lose our trusted brand. So we have we have a lot of guardrails, and going into I'm probably not best positioned though to be super articulate on explaining them.
No worries. I'll go into another question that came in from Padmaja. What did your process look like in terms of creating meaningful metrics for measuring helpfulness or harmlessness of AI? And was there any framework, technical or industry sector level that guided you? And who are the stakeholders involved in its development for org-focused metrics?
I think so. I can be maybe a little bit more insightful on this, and that I think our app has very strict eligibility requirements. Like, you can't make more than a certain amount of money. You can't have more than a certain amount of assets. You can't have a lot of detail on this level. And so I think the good thing for us is, because we weren't using AI to do any of that gating criteria, and once people got inside of our gate, we knew that basically it's safe for us to help them, that the AI it created a lower burden basically on the AI being perfect, right? Because the AI is just, people are either going to move through this and they're going to get an outcome. 99% of our users who complete all the process get a fresh start, or they're not. And so it's really how efficient can the AI be in unblocking people and preventing them from dropping off? Those are really the core metrics for us.
Maybe I'll jump into that one. I do think I do think there's a view maybe implicit in this question of AI has to be an all or nothing solution in place for some of the problems. And I don't think that's necessarily the case. If you look at LLMs today, one of the things I personally think they're really great at is reading huge volumes of information and absorbing it and then distilling it down to something. And so, for example, one way you could deal with that, and we talked about the data quality problem, getting great user input is really hard. And so you can absorb and take in requests and use LLMs to turn that into a much more repeatable pattern and still have high quality reviewed data that then is going back out as an answer. And so you don't have to think of it as an all or nothing kind of change. There are pieces that may make more sense or less sense. And so I would definitely, there's a fantastic series I've mentioned before around incremental AI. And I think that's a really strong approach that you think about the problem where it's really great, that is a part of a bigger system. And so that when you go towards helpfulness and harmlessness, if there is a problem that is a high risk problem you're trying to solve, that probably means you have to be really careful and think about what is the risk and what are those guardrails, and make sure that you're putting a system in place that can retain high trust. And this is a part of it rather than this is the entire thing, and you just kind of let it out there and hope for the best.
Thanks so much, Sid. I'm actually going to have to close this out. It looks like we are at time. I hate to say it. I feel like there's so much more we could dig into with this conversation. But we do have, just to share, we are going to be wrapping up our webinar session here today. So thank you, everybody, for joining our panel. And a huge thank you to our guest speakers, Nithya, Jonathan, and Sid, for sharing so candidly about your organization's work in the exploration phase. We really appreciate your insights. For those who are able to stick around, we will have a community discussion happening over on Zoom. We'll be posting a link in the chat here over the next 20 minutes or so. So please do join us over there if you're able. If not, we hope to see you in the next installment of our series, where we'll focus on the adoption phase of the AI journey. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining.
Thanks.
Thank you.